Hello, friends. I am the Reverend Dottie Matthews. I use she, her pronouns. I am an older white woman with gray curly hair. Today I'm wearing a light blue blouse with pinstripes and dark blue slacks, and I am very grateful to be with you today. Because when Molly floated this idea of me offering a sermon on this subject of chaplaining one another, I eagerly agreed for a few reasons. The first is that I am so grateful for the many gifts my years as a chaplain brought to me. It was a beautiful vocation, and I loved every minute of it. The next is because I love this spiritual home, and I'm grateful if something that I have experienced might be helpful here. And third, because I feel that without a doubt, many of us do need chaplaining in times such as these, because we're all going through something right now, aren't we? Chaplains serve in lots of different settings, and as we know, they are called when a need has emerged that is potentially too big or too heavy for the one directly experiencing it to hold alone. Not exclusively, though, we know that. Chaplains get called to help celebrate important life events too, but that is far less frequent, and today I'll be focusing mainly on being there in the more stressful times of life. I think that we can probably all agree that there is a mighty heap of stress surrounding us in these days, and we know more to come. My sense is that there is a constant buzz of palpable anxiety in the air, not just here, but out in our community and out in the world. It started many months ago, and it dramatically increased the day after the election. And since then, every day, the hum gets louder and louder, like an airplane drawing near. We have no clear idea what that airplane holds or how or when its contents will be dropped, but we know that when that happens, our suffering and the threats against those we love will increase, which is a big part of what compels us to come here week after week. In times such as this, we need to know that we are not alone. A chaplain's vocation centers on providing that kind of assurance that those who are suffering can feel accompanied in whatever it is that they are going through. So let me share just a bit of my experience before I offer some thoughts for you to consider about how each of us might show up for one another in these extremely precarious times. I was 50 when I recognized my call to ministry. I had had a full career in the business world, and that was financially rewarding, but honestly, it sucked my soul dry. I knew that my ministry was going to focus on spiritual listening because I had been a lay minister in my congregation, and I had found that to be beautiful work. Those studying for the ministry then were required to take 1 unit of CPE, which is Clinical Pastoral Education. That was, for me, 3 months working as a chaplain under the close guidance of a credentialed supervisor. I did that first at a Lutheran elder care facility, and I loved it, as I strongly suspected that I would. I followed that with another 4 units in a hospital setting, and when I graduated and was ordained, I served as the pastoral care minister for a congregation with about 600 members. And then I went into community ministry and served as the workplace chaplain for Goodwill in north central Wisconsin, providing spiritual care for about 1,500 team members. That's the job I retired from when Rosie and I moved here in 2015. Clearly, those years held a lot of listening. So many beautiful stories that I was privileged to hear, stories of devastation and loss and pain, but also incredible stories of resilience and creativity and strength. The early part, when I was in the healthcare settings, those stories were generally about medical crises of one sort or another, but in the congregation and in the workplace, they ran the full gamut of broken relationships and grief, mental health concerns, money problems, fears for vulnerable parents, worries over troubled children, and on and on and on. I was privileged to help folks carry the stuff of their lives. For me, being able to offer that kind of presence was a glorious gift with profound mutual rewards. One of the writers that I studied in my classes was feminist scholar Mary Pellauer, and she wrote this: "If there's anything worth calling theology, it is listening to people's stories, listening and inviting them to become even more brightly beautiful than they already are." Reading that for the first time felt like pure truth to me. That I knew right away. That expressed my relational theology. When we truly attend to one another with mindfulness and with compassion, setting ourselves aside to be present to one's heart's truth, it becomes clear that the place upon which we are standing is holy and sacred ground. It goes way beyond just hearing what someone is saying. It is full-bodied attuning to the fears, the longings, the hopes, the fullness of their experience. In my mind, I boiled it down to having the profound privilege of creating a space where people could simply tell me, this is what it feels like to be me right now. And it is sad but true. With all the competing forces in this current world of ours, it is a very rare gift to be heard in that way and to be surrounded in safety and non-judgment while we are. Now, Molly does this for us, and if we have them, our therapists and our counselors may do this for us, and we're grateful for that. But we know that we don't need a credential to be present to one another in the way that I'm describing. Rather, it seems like the very pressured time that we are in holds an invitation for us to make ourselves available in new ways, calling forth our courage and our commitment to share the realities of our lives deeply and vulnerably together as a crucial component of our survival, especially as that aforementioned hum of whatever it is that is coming our way gets closer and closer. In these unprecedented times, we have the opportunity to create here a new way of being, side by side, becoming even more truly a community together. We know that this individualistic culture of ours has pounded into our heads that if we cannot thrive out of our own efforts and our own gumption, then we are somehow defective and undeserving. But through our experience and that of those near to us, we know that just is not true. The oppressive powers that be don't want us to embrace the understanding, but it is true nonetheless. We need each other. We need to be seen and understood and loved just as we are. This is how we are wired. This is how human bonds are made and strengthened. This is how we find the strength and the vision to move forward together. So even though I am fully aware of the weight and the actual threat of these days, I feel like I'm also catching a glimpse of something new being born out of these dark times. Right here, right now, I feel we are being called to move aside those old, dominant, harmful stories of hyper-independence and self-reliance, and to see clearly that they do not serve us any longer, and that in fact they never did. This curiosity about how we will go forward, about what will emerge here, is also born out of the fact that we have been prepared to greet this time by our faith, by every word spoken from this pulpit week after week, by all the groups we belong to, the books we've read, the spiritual practices we've done, all the relationship building we have done. We have been prepared to show up at times like this. So, if one way that we are being asked to show up is to sometimes make of ourselves chaplains for one another, what does that mean exactly? What might it look like? Well, honestly, all of this, we don't know because it has not yet come into being. It is we who will figure out the story of how UUCC will move into this time in history. If we don't know exactly, that's okay. We just need to be willing to show up for each other with our hearts committedly open to what is growing here. So let me share a story from my past about not knowing. It was the first week of my training at that elder care facility I told you about before. The supervisor, David, had taken us out for a welcome lunch. As we re-entered the building, The other students and I, our small little cohort, were teasing each other and laughing as we headed downstairs to our classroom. A nurse approached us and said that a resident on 3 East had just died. David turned to me and he said, 3E, that's you, Dottie, go. Well, mind you, at this point, I had not done chaplaining at all. I had taken some classes, but so I looked at him with very wide eyes that were clearly saying, you're coming too, right? And he looked at me steadily and very gently said, go. I climbed the stairs, doing my version of a fervent prayer to whatever powers that be. Please don't let me screw this up. Please don't make me do something wrong. Please let me be helpful here. When I exited the stairwell, I stepped into the hall and saw a tight crowd of people laughing, holding each other. I'm sorry, they were not laughing. They were crying. They were crying. I don't know why I said that. They were crying, holding each other. And they turned and saw me standing in the hallway, and one of them said, oh, good, the chaplain's here. And I could see that crowd of people visibly relax. They opened a pathway to welcome me in. In that moment, I knew so clearly and ever after that chaplaining was not about me, for I had never met any member of that family. But what I represented to them was a calm, caring presence, a person who would gently be with them as they processed what had just happened to their loved one and what was now happening for each of them, and all the questions they had about how they would go forward from that moment. They knew they were not alone with all the sorrow and all the questions that they were holding. So that was a great foundational lesson for me. It is the humble heart that we bring, the gentle, caring space we create, not the wisdom of our words and all of our proffered solutions. It is simply our genuine, open heart to say with absolute sincerity, in this moment, you are not alone. So that, for me, was lesson number 1, and it may be helpful for you too. As we step into these times and we extend ourselves as companions to each other along this very rocky journey into our near and far future, we don't need to be expert in what we are offering to one another, but we do need to be humble and curious and tender and respect fully the agency and the dignity of those that we are with. Because none of us has experienced precisely in times such as these. So in order for us to build a true and caring community, the kind that we envision together, we have to be okay with not knowing. We're going to be asked to stretch in whole new ways. I don't know exactly what that will mean, but I feel fairly certain that's coming. Me preaching here is a very small example of this because I've not written or shared a sermon in years. But I wanted to show up for this community because I feel like we have such a golden opportunity here to create new ways of being, to nurture the possibilities embedded in this emerging interdependence. My friend James brought us his voice and his presence in that beautiful song. He, too, stretched to offer himself in new ways today because he also loves you and this place. So maybe we can vow together to not let self-doubt stop us, to instead get over ourselves so that we can, with humility and with a realistic eye, assess what gifts and what growth edges we each have to bring here. The deep truth is that we do need each other. In times such as these, holding so many dark unknowns, it seems the only way that we will get through this is by opening our hearts in all of our own shaky uncertainty, opening them fully to one another. And since we can't get out of the current realities of our earth, which include the climate and the politics and the wars and the suffering, we can't get out of those things. There's no escape. It feels like the existing forces are conspiring to make our world an utterly inhospitable place for human thriving. But I wonder, since we can't get out of this, could we see together new possibilities that this dark time holds? Parker Palmer, Quaker theologian and writer, says, what we can't get out of, we can get into. How, I wonder, together might we get into the challenges of these times, to live in a far deeper way together, to live into becoming that beloved community that we all dream of. I told you that early in my training, I learned the priceless gift of understanding that it is not about me or any of us, but about the peaceful, genuinely curious, and caring presence that we can bring to one another. Expanding on this, the philosopher Bayo Akomolafe has been telling us for quite a while, these times are urgent and therefore let us slow down. That resonates so strongly with me that I have had it taped to my laptop for a handful of years. But Bayo has written much more about how it is that we might go forward amidst this time with all the cracks and fissures that are erupting in our world as we know it. He has recently suggested that in this current era, the time for making space for one another has passed. Because of the magnitude of the powers assailing our freedoms and our welfare, we must become, he says, sanctuary for one another. Opening the doors wider is all well and good, but how do we deeply care for one another once folks have found their way here? These times are calling us to find new and far deeper ways of becoming shelter to and for one another. So, if this kind of presence is part of what we are imagining together as ways that we can care for our community and beyond, here are a few other tips that I have learned along the way. Chaplains are trained to be self-aware. They understand well that the energy they carry into a conversation impacts deeply the quality of that conversation and all the outcomes that might potentially arise there. So this kind of listening requires a listening from the heart, attending to the words being said, but especially listening for the feelings under the words, and then responding not with platitudes or with unsolicited answers and solutions. Listening like a chaplain means refraining from those sort of quick and easy responses and instead just offering solidarity and reverence for the truths that are being shared and extending an energetic assurance in that person's ability to find their own unique answers. A chaplain comes alongside as someone shares about the heaviness, the fear, the aloneness, the worry that they feel. A chaplain refrains from rushing to offer feedback, and in fact, an attentive silence is often one of the best things a spiritual listener can do. Turning toward the person, leaning in, attending with eyes and body, offering a patient heart to allow the truths of that moment to emerge. This is a beautiful thing. It is real, it is unhurried, and as I said before, it feels quite sacred. Now, sometimes this kind of listening happens not in a lengthy conversation, but in just a few moments. It's much more about the genuine expression of care than it is about the number of minutes we spend together. This kind of authentic connection can happen in a look or a smile or, with permission, the touch of a hand or a hug. We got to experience a taste of this a couple of weeks ago when Molly asked us to pair up randomly and share briefly with a partner what we most needed in that moment, and then to say back to each other what we had heard. I was paired with a man that I had met, but we had never had any kind of a deep conversation together. The pure unprotectedness of that moment between us had us both in tears. It was a beautiful sensation and has lasted in my heart ever since. Chaplaining doesn't have to take a lot of time. It just takes mindfulness and intention. Here is another very interesting, to me, aspect of what I'm describing. Chaplains, by inclination and training, go toward the suffering. Many of you may know the work of the wise activist, Joanna Macy. She is in her 90s now, and she continues to share her wisdom about how we might move through this time that she has called the great unraveling. She has said that she is glad to be alive at a time like this. And the first time I heard her say that, it baffled me. How could I be glad that every time I sing Circle Round for Freedom, and I get to that line, for the children of my children, it catches in my throat. I can hardly bear to imagine the world my children's children are inheriting. But Joanna tells us that she is glad and grateful to be here, to be one of the many holding the vision and moving toward the possibility of a great turning. As I reflected on that, and I thought about those days that I was a hospital chaplain, my understanding grew. When I was on duty and my pager went off, and yes, we had pagers in those days, I was very glad to be there. I had prepared myself to be ready to go toward the suffering because I had the time and the heart and the resources to bring aid and assistance. Responding to the alert, I was quickly on my way with, as our reading suggested, the necessary equipment. The one final aspect that I want to share for you today is that chaplains do get days off. It is not possible to show up for others with this kind of willing presence all of the time. Chaplains need desperately to refill their own well, to engage in their own spiritual practices, to set down their role and just be. When I was in the hospital, I journeyed with so many people with frightening and tragic and heart-wrenching stories, and I started then and continued in every setting until my retirement to have a bell by my office door. As I came in each morning, I would ring it, a signal to myself to be fully present here and now. And after a long day of holding all those difficult and challenging events and stories, as I left for the evening, I would ring it again, a signal to myself that I didn't have to carry it all home, that I could and should leave it there until the next shift. Being in this role taught me that the universe is vast, and therefore, so are the ways that people are supported along their journey. It is a dangerous story that any of us might tell ourselves if we imagine that we are uniquely necessary to a situation. A chaplain shows up fully with heart, mind, and body, and when it is time, they set it down. They know they are needed to accompany others, but not to carry them. I'm a collector of quotes. If you know me, you know that, so please bear with me as I offer one more. This one is from a religious writer who happened to have served a little bit of time as a chaplain himself, Frederick Buechner. He wrote, "Here is the world. Terrible and beautiful things will happen. Be not afraid." I believe that we can navigate these looming, unpredictable days knowing the answer to our fear is our togetherness. We are not all called primarily to offer listening to one another. Some of us will show up with muscles and a moving van. Some will bring a warm coat or a wrench to fix the leaky pipe or a freshly made meal. The needs are and will be intense, and our combined resources and creativity are boundless. Embracing our interdependence, well, this is who we are as UUs. That word, interdependence, is highly featured in our faith's values, and recognizing and celebrating our interreliance is exactly who we are. Ours is a faith of active love. So let's make the commitment with one another that when we can, we will show up with and for each other. We will bring our full and open hearts to the best of our ability, bringing with us all the necessary equipment. May it be so.